Chapter 55. Maria, Russell, Judith. Eyes closed under the showerhead, Ray conjured up images of the dead cluster as the water cascaded over the crown of her head. The people Perdita had killed, murdered, stood up, walked around the rig, and slit their throats as they lay unconscious. Now she knew who'd taken their lives, it seemed important to name them. Maria, Russell, Judith, Keith? Was that the guy with the stubble? Simon? No, he'd been excluded from the group already. A lucky escape. There must have been two more, but she couldn't remember their names. Such a blur. Judith. She remembered Judith. Ray wondered when she'd start crying. She waited for a lump in her throat or tears to well up. But nothing happened. No tears, no crying. What was wrong with her? She tested her feelings a little. Judith. Wasn't she sad about her death? Didn't it hurt? She'd liked Judith. No, you didn't, said a voice in her periphery. Him. You didn't like her at all. Don't listen, she reminded herself. He doesn't exist, and if you ignore him, he'll go away. And what does he know anyway? I had reservations about Judith's professional competence, sure. But apart from that, I thought she was all right. Bit dotty, but nice enough. Ray, you hated the whole cluster. It was as clear as day. Shutting him out, Ray concentrated on a mental image of Judith sat in the cluster. A heavy ball of despair rolled slowly around her stomach. Late for every single session, without exception, the woman would apologize her way into the metastasis suite like a naughty dog, and, shedding layers of clothing, bumble into her recliner where she'd fuss and fiddle with a host of things in her handbag. Once she'd finished shuffling about, Judith would glance around with a practiced look of innocence, pretending not to understand why everyone was glaring at her. And Ray had just wanted to kick her. Judith was fucking infuriating, and her death had not changed this unfortunate fact. You realise that not talking to me is utterly futile, don't you? Ray didn't say a word. She turned up the pressure in the shower, using the loud hiss of the water to help block him out. The shadow in the corner of the room crossed its arms and tapped a foot. The man with the cloven thumb wasn't presenting himself in any specific bodily form for the time being. Ray was a bit fragile and needed to gear down. It was best to avoid anything too confrontational. He'd manifested as a voice in her head at first, but that hadn't worked out so well. The screaming and headbutting of the wall had been a dead giveaway. So until she'd settled down, he had to make do with a vague, shadowy presence in the corner of her eye. I know perfectly well what's going on in your head. I'm right here. I could just respond to your thoughts, you know. It's more civilised having a conversation out loud, don't you think? Ray closed her eyes and growled. Okay, fine, have it your way. But you'll have to buck your ideas up sooner or later. It's not like I'm going anywhere. Watching the medic drone like a hawk in case it tried something suspicious, Ray allowed the small automaton to strap her knee up. She refused the painkiller and winced her way into the fresh set of clothes laid out for her. The style was simple, But as she donned the garments, there was no denying the quality of the fabric. This one outfit probably cost more than her entire wardrobe. There was a knock at the door, and Ray finished strapping her new eyeline onto her wrist before answering. A man invited her for some refreshments in the airship's viewing lounge. Perhaps in his late 40s, with deep grooves like parentheses carving down his cheekbones. His expression and stance set with a mix of fascination and purpose. Ray caught a glimpse of something behind the condensation on the mirror. No. It advised her to smuggle the scissors she'd found in the cabinet with her and to hold the man hostage at the first opportunity. Ray left the scissors where they were and followed behind. The lounge consisted of a few sectional sofas and armchairs curving around one another. Here and there, islands of low coffee tables reached into the space. Enclosed in a clear perspex dome, the round room was situated on the exterior of the airship, right on the top, in front of a tall, sail-like rudder. It had an exceptional panoramic view of the surrounding airspace. Cruising above the clouds, cumulus towers of brilliant puffed vapour drifted past them. The airship banked occasionally, scooping along the caves and cliff edges of the billowing, evolving structures. A waiter drone quietly left a carafe of sparkling water and some frosted glasses to hand. After giving Ray a few moments to take in her spectacular surroundings, the man poured a glass for each of them and handed her one. "Do you remember my name?" he asked. Ray stayed silent. "No, still in shock. I'm Pascal Dubas. Welcome aboard the Numinosity. We're just waiting for my colleague to join us. I'm sure you have a lot on your mind, and we're keen to iron some things out. She'll be here soon." Ray wasn't that thirsty, but she took a long draught of the water anyway, more to mask her face than anything. She didn't want anyone trying to read her right now. Taking her time to sip and swallow its contents, Ray stared at the man over the rim of her glass. Pascal's attention seemed more absorbed by the light and shapes in the sky. He swirled some ice around his own drink and smiled at a few lines that had come to him. "Who is the carer in the clouds? Who is the beacon beckoning? Who will guard the flock like perimeter fencing, or like a guy whose job it is to guard sheep?" Ray's squint tightened. Was this guy for real? Actually reciting fucking poetry at her? Who did he think he was? Parading his superiority as if the obscene corporate wealth, the airship, the goddamn cloud bubble in the sky wasn't enough. No, this smug cunt had to lord his finely educated mind over her too. Fucking carer in the clouds. A wisp curled out from a cloud formation they were passing. It looked a little like a cloven thumb, and a voice from somewhere behind the waiter drone spoke in those deep, familiar tones. "Who is it that thinks they're superior here, Ray?" the man with the cloven thumb asked. She clenched her jaw and huddled down into the sofa. "It's just a poem," he continued. "Shit poem, but at least he's had a go. Where's all this coming from, do you think?" Ray snarled again. She was sick of this, out of patience. What little tether she'd had was long gone. "Oh, spare me, please," she scowled down into her chest. arms crossed, face bitter. Can't you just shut the fuck up for a minute, eh? Pascal assumed she was talking to him, and it took him aback. No one had spoken to him like this for a long time. His composure returned in the next breath, and he nodded patiently. The Panmotech was exhausted. She'd been through an ordeal. "As you wish," he'd said with care. Ray shook her head at the sheer idiocy of the world. "Good grief, I wasn't bloody talking to you," she muttered to herself. Pascal frowned, a little bemused. Then his eyebrows drew themselves up again as a thought occurred to him. What had that pregnant terrorist said? A man following her? Shape-shifter? Something about his thumb? The penny dropped. "Ah, I see. You weren't addressing me, were you?" Shit. She'd spoken out loud. This fucking voice in her head was messing with her. "So he's here too," Pascal continued, impressed. "That is quite something. Quite something indeed." Ray turned away as the Hype and Buzz director observed her with interest. It was not the time to press matters. Something outside caught the man's attention, and he broke their silence. "There, she's arrived." Ray followed his gaze and saw another, much smaller airship skimming over the clouds towards them. Its mirrored surface reflected the curls and colours of the airscape. The craft slowed and then ducked under the hull of their ship, presumably to dock somewhere on the underside.